And joining us now, David Frum, editor of thefrumforum.com and a former speechwriter, of course, for President George W. Bush. Nice to have you in that chair.
Thank you, Steve, for the hospitality.
It's always good to have you on the program. Usually you're on the satellite, but it's really much better when you're in that chair. As you know, this was one heck of a night recently for the Republican Party. Depending on how you count it, it was either the biggest election in 60-some-odd years or 70-some-odd years. The last information, I guess, that we have is that there was a gain of 60 seats in the House of Representatives for the Republicans, a gain of 6 seats in the Senate for the Republicans, and a gain of at least 10 governorships for the Republicans. So I guess where I want to start with you is, what do you think the American people were saying in those midterm elections?
I think make the hurting stop. The United States has gone through the most protracted downturn since World War II. There are moments in 1981-82 when unemployment was higher than it has been, but unemployment has been very high for a very long time, at the same time as there have been an enormous number of foreclosures and a collapse in wealth. And it goes on and on. Most of us think that the economy is growing now, but September of 2010 was the worst month for home foreclosures. And they would have been even higher in October, except for a glitch in the processing that temporarily interrupted the foreclosures. So people are in extreme economic distress. They don't see any benefit from the president's measures. They voted for the opposition.
Let's check out the Tea Party for a second, because 39 candidates apparently, backed by the Tea Party, won seats in the House of Representatives. What does that suggest to you about how significant a force the Tea Party is?
Well, I think we have to be very careful about using this term Tea Party. Because the question, what is it exactly? And I think it's helpful to think of it not as a movement, more as a brand. So people all over the country who have different kinds of very strong critiques of the president apply this name to themselves. That doesn't necessarily mean they have a lot in common with each other. But what it for sure means is there are alternative power centers in Congress. The theoretical leader of the Republicans in the House is John Boehner. Only Michelle Bachmann, the flamboyant congresswoman from Minnesota,
flamboyant, that's a nice way to put it,
raised more money. John Boehner is going to be Speaker of the House. He's a hugely powerful person. He raised $7 million. Michelle Bachmann raised $10 million. Mitch McConnell is the leader of the Republicans in the Senate. He's from Kentucky. He picked a colleague that he wanted, endorsed somebody, a protege of his. Jim DeMint from South Carolina came into Kentucky, endorsed a different candidate the very next day after McConnell endorsed his candidate, and beat him. Big slap in the face.
DeMint's candidate won.
But DeMint's candidate won. So now the question, if you're an ambitious member of the House or an ambitious member of the Senate, is who can hurt me more? And you have to placate both the official leadership, but also this new unofficial leadership.
Well, that's the question then. Who do you worry more about right now if you're kind of part of the Republican establishment? Are you more worried about the Tea Party or satisfying your own masters?
Well, you've got a lot of worries. You've got an omnidirectional worry. If you're, for example, a big donor to the Republican Party, if you're a governor, if you're an organizer, if you're a campaign consultant, you're worried that the Tea Party folks will do things that will jinx your chances for 2012. The formally organized Republican Party is terrified of a Palin candidacy. They see what happened in Nevada to Sharon Angle and to Christine O'Donnell in Delaware, and what likely happened to Joe Miller in Alaska. They don't want that to happen nationwide. On the other hand, they also know that if you go up against these people, you lose in the internal Republican primaries and caucuses.
But on balance, would you say that the Republican Party benefited more from Tea Party influence? You gave the Angle and the O'Donnell examples where clearly the Tea Party influence cost them seats. But on balance, was the Tea Party a net plus to the Republicans versus a minus?
Well, it's a difficult assessment. It meant more money, for sure, more volunteers, more enthusiasm, but it also meant lost seats. It probably meant the loss of the Senate. And just to drive home what it meant, for example, in Nevada at the same time as it defeated Sharon Angle, elected a Republican governor. 1 out of 5 of the people who voted for the Republican governor voted against Sharon Angle. And what you have to worry about if you're a Republican is 2010. As you know, I've been banging the drum of alarm about this for a long time. And you're very charitable not to say, so were you completely wrong?
My next question, David, is a lot of people think you should eat crowd.
Okay.
So I was going to get there.
But you had this extraordinarily protracted downturn. And Republicans benefited. But what you have to worry about is, speaking of branding, what is the brand that this creates for 2012? What is the brand that this does for the long term? Sometimes a party buys itself a big win, as the Democrats, for example, had in 1974 after Richard Nixon. They had a huge win, one of the biggest wins of the post-war era, after which they were completely identified as the party of tax and spend liberalism, as the soft-on-crime party, and 74 is their last good election for a long time.
Well, I know you believe in sort of smart conservatism and the comeback of smart conservatism, and you have said that too many in the Tea Party represent dumb conservatism and slogans.
I don't use that language, but
I think in your book you wrote somewhere that, what was the word?
If you campaign
Stupid.
I said
you're against stupid conservatism.
if you campaign dumb, you win dumb. If you win dumb, you govern dumb.
Okay, so which brand of republicanism are they closer to right now?
Well, right now the new entrants come in, and they're mixed. There's some really fantastic people, and there's some really fantastic freshmen. There are people with a big future. There are others who are more alarming. But the new Republican class comes in with 4 commitments. They're committed to holding the line on taxes, to renewing the Bush tax cut. They're committed to maintaining the defense budget. They're committing to balancing the federal budget as rapidly as possible, and they're committed not only to protecting the Medicare program of health insurance for the over 65s, but actually of repealing President Obama's constraints on the future growth of Medicare.
Can you do all 4 at once?
I don't even think you can do 3 of them, but maybe you can do 3. For sure you can do 2, you can't do 4. And so there are going to be some awkward choices made, and there's some internal conflicts, because this was a party of limited government elected by a voting population that was 25% or almost 25% over 65. And that is the group in America that gets the most help from government. The ideology and the interest group, the voting group, are pointing in 2 different directions.
Let's share with you and our viewers some of the exit polling that took place a couple of weeks ago at the midterms. Here's how Hispanics voted. Democrats won by 32 percentage points, but Republicans took more of the Hispanic vote than they did in 2008. There's that one. Let's flip to the next chart. How college graduates voted. In the past, Democrats did very well. This time, Republicans won by 16 points. And of course, the all-important independent vote, which Barack Obama did so well with in the 2008 presidential election, Republicans took it by 18 points this time. Now, key to your argument in the past few years has been that Republican policies are driving away demographics like the Latinos and the college grads and so on. Do these results cast any doubt on that thesis?
No, and you have to unpack these results very carefully to understand why. Now, let's look at the college graduate number. When you use college graduates, you're looking at the entire stock of college graduates, everybody from last year to the people who are 97 years old. In this election, with the electorate so weighted toward the elderly, only 9% of the people who voted were under 30. You are getting college people, my contemporaries, your contemporaries, and even older people who graduated from college at a time when the college population was much more conservative than it is today. It was still true that President Obama has favorable approval ratings from the under 30s. They're his best group, and in fact, he still is over 50% with them. They also, by the way, approve of his health care plan. They didn't come out to vote. But their absence doesn't mean that they've changed their minds. It just meant that they're discouraged, they're unhappy, and they're not voting. The same thing with the independents. The Republican Party has shrunk to its lowest level since the Watergate era. Only now 23% of Americans call themselves Republicans. So the independent group is inflated by a lot of people who used to call themselves Republicans, but who are not the same people as called themselves independent 10 years ago. So if you, when you start looking at the groups you're most worried about, the young and the highly educated among the young, all the problems I diagnosed are there, but what we've got is like the problem of somebody saying, responding to a case about climate change by invoking last year's cold winter. Nobody said that that the trend toward warmer climates means there will never again be a cold winter. And I never suggest that Republicans will never have another good election, and certainly not if you have a recession of this magnitude under a Democratic president. But when you draw the graphs, starting in 1980, or starting in whenever you want to start them, starting in 1980 or 1988, and extending them out to 2010 and then beyond, the trends are going to look just the way they looked 2 years ago.
So it would be a mistake for Republicans to infer from these election returns that the public has suddenly fallen in love with them.
They say, Republicans know that, Republicans say that. And that's been a big theme, humility, and they've been very wise about this. And Marco Rubio, a future star of the party, was very emphatic. We need to be humble, we need not to assume. But then they're governing as if there was nothing to learn. And the big theme of the Republican new Congress has been winners don't compromise. Of course, in 2008, what they also said, back then the theme was losers don't compromise.
You have a situation in the states right now where the Democrats control the administration and the Senate, but not the House, which sounds like a great prescription for gridlock. So my question is, how much of a conservative agenda do you think that these Republicans will really be able to advance over the next couple of years?
It looks very promising that they'll be able to renew most of the Bush tax cuts, even possibly all of the Bush tax cuts, for a short period of time. I think they will also be able to, they will reinforce the administration's commitment on Afghanistan and other foreign affairs. So those will be the areas where they'll make a big difference. I think we are going to see a fateful moment of choosing, where we either get on a positive path of negotiation or a dangerous path of confrontation. And that will, I think, materialize kind of quickly. And it's not that somebody has a plan for one or the other, but there's a feedback effect. If things start on the right footing, you can build habits of deal making. Certainly, I think John Boehner wants to be a deal maker. Where this will come to a head is in the area of health care. Republicans are committed to an impossible agenda of repealing all of the Obama health plan.
They can't do that.
They can't do that. What they can do is they can try to selectively deny funds, because a lot of the health plan requires an appropriation in the House of Representatives. Appropriations must start in the House of Representatives, and they can decline to do it. But the catch is the tax increases in the plan, they're already law. If the House does nothing, they go into effect. And a lot of the regulatory measures, they're already law, they go into effect. So the Republicans are on a course where non-cooperation with the Obama administration means you get all of the things you like least. If you want to stop the things you like least, you have to make deals.
But George Will is fond of saying the framers wanted it this way. They designed gridlock because they didn't want a tyrant just having his will. So
Yes.
is this working the way it was supposed to?
No. I think there's a kernel of truth there, but a lot of overstatement. The framers, first of all, never envisioned the party system. But second, the American government has a whole series. The American government, it should be said, is not a parliamentary system. Okay, everybody knows that, but they don't really think about what that means. There's no government and there's no opposition. In a parliamentary
But there
system,
sort of is now, isn't there?
there is not. In a parliamentary system, the government governs, and if there's a majority, the opposition yells its head off, but there's nothing they can do to stop the government. And the check on the government is frequent alternations in office. In the American system, there are lots of points of who is the guy? Is it the president? Is it the guy who has the majority in the legislature?
Well, hang on. For the last 2 years, Democratic president, Democratic Senate, Democratic House,
Yes.
the Democrats have been the government.
But the norm for the past generation has been division. So, and it's quite often the case that one party has a majority in the House of Representatives, the House of Commons, and the other party has the presidency, the prime minister, and who's the government? The point is this system rests on degrees of cross-institutional cooperation, particularly in the Senate. We talk about the Democrats controlling the Senate. The Senate proceeds by unanimous consent. Any one senator can stop the action of the Senate at any time. That's why they're so elaborately courteous to each other. The Senate also has rules that allow 40 senators to defeat a bill by simply continuing to talk forever. But that power, although it theoretically existed, just wasn't used very much until recently. Now, everything is filibustered. So there's this practice that anything important in the Senate, anything unimportant, the confirmation of an ambassador, requires 60 votes. That's new. And the framers never intended that. That's not in the Constitution. That's not even in the law. That's in the rules of the Senate. And this creates huge new possibilities for gridlock and obstruction that weren't there, never mind in 1789, that weren't there in 1965.
So when the Democrats had 60 seats before that election in Massachusetts, why didn't they change that rule?
Well, that's a question that is going to haunt them, because senators have different agendas from the government. Also, it would have taken not 60, but I think 67 to change the rule.
Oh, I see, 2/3.
Well, or some people, actually, now we're going to go into much more American politics than anybody wants. Some people think it only takes 50, and this probably would end up going to the Supreme Court, whether it takes 67 or whether it takes 50. But you could change the rule. But it's not just legislation, and it's not just the filibuster done by 40 people. Any one senator there's now a convention where any one senator can indefinitely delay the vote on any official.
Does it make you wonder how anybody ever gets anything done down there?
Believe me.
Okay, let me read you something Jonathan Chait wrote in the New Republic earlier in November. In the media, you're seeing a lot of familiar claims that the two parties need to work together. There is no incentive for the Republicans to do so. Even on issues where they can get a pure win, handing a win to Obama reduces their ability to gain the presidency in 2012. So why would they pursue an ancillary part of their agenda and reduce the chance to achieve the core elements of that agenda?
Yes.
You got an answer for him?
I do. And that's an example of how this concept of reinventing the American government as a parliamentary government is infectious and dangerous. Because the incentive you have is if nothing happens, there is real danger that this recession will prolong itself more. We are the outer limits of what monetary policy can do. The Federal Reserve has just done a big new emission of currency. maybe it'll work. Let's hope. But Congress may also need to act. But we're in a situation where Congress can't. We are going to have people who are out of work for months and years, and their benefits may begin to expire. The United States abolished welfare, remember, in the 1990s. So if you are a childless person who is physically capable of working and you age out of unemployment insurance, you get nothing. Nothing. Nothing.
There is no other safety net.
There's no other safety net. There's some temporary things in the Obama stimulus, but they expire too. So Congress, the incentive to work together is better government. And that used to be a powerful incentive because of extra political norms, conventions, expectations, and customs. If those norms, conventions, expectations, and customs atrophy, the system, Jonathan is right, absolutely right. But if you're a Republican, the incentive also used to be, if you're not personally going to be president, Democratic president is not the worst thing in the world, especially if it leads to the preservation and continuation of Republican control of Congress.
Well, let's play that out a little bit. Back, when Bill Clinton was at the halfway mark of his first term, and the midterms were a disaster for him, the Republicans overplayed their hand. They shut down the government. A couple of years later, the revolution was over. What are the dangers to the GOP this time if they overplay their hand?
They're not as great as they were then for these reasons. First, Newt Gingrich not only liked power, but he liked publicity. So he made sure that everybody knew his name. So that it was not the president against nameless people who you can't vote against, that he put a face on the opposition to Bill Clinton and turned politics into a popularity contest between the president and the Speaker of the House of Representatives, a contest he then lost. The second difference was this. The middle 1990s are the time where somebody says, we've got this thing called the worldwide, we've got this thing called the internet. I wonder how it would work if we put pictures on it. And it turned out that was a really big deal. And that starts in 1995-96. And American productivity growth, which had been about 2.5% a year, in 1995-96 shifts gears and goes to 3.5% a year. And suddenly there's this takeoff of American economic growth, higher incomes, prosperity. So one, gridlock mattered less because people felt pretty good. And second, it reinforced the claims of the president. This time we are probably not in for that kind of growth acceleration.
Let me read you something now that Scott Rasmussen wrote in the Wall Street Journal, that this election was not a repudiation of Obama or an embracing of the Tea Party, but rather a pox on all your houses. And here it goes. The reality is that voters in 2010 are doing the same thing they did in 2006 and 2008. They are voting against the party in power. More precisely, it is a rejection of a bipartisan political elite that's lost touch with the people they are supposed to serve. Based on our polling, 51% now see Democrats as the party of big government, and nearly as many see Republicans as the party of big business. That leaves no party left to represent the American people.
Okay.
You on side with that?
I think that's pretty good. I think that's 3/4 of the way there. It contains one sentence, however, that I think is...
Which one?
It's the one where he says that they are voting against an out-of-touch elite. They're voting against an unsuccessful elite. Elites are inescapable. And Scott Rasmussen, who's a very distinguished graduate of many elite schools and the creator of ESPN, who then took his great fortune and started his own polling business because that interested him, and who is a fine and outstanding member of exactly what an elite should look like and the functions it should do, should know this. The elites are unavoidable. The question is, what kind of results do they deliver? And I think where he is very right is we had, in the Bush years, a period where average incomes did not rise. They stagnated. And then beginning in 2007, we have had a series of economic shocks. The subprime mortgage crisis bites in the summer of 2007. The economy probably goes into recession in the summer of 2008. And then you have the financial crisis in the fall. So through 3 cycles in a row, people are saying, somebody make this system work. They don't mind elites because they don't want to make the system work themselves. They want to hire people to make the system work. And when the people make the system work, they don't care whether they're in touch or out of touch. They're presumptively in touch because it's working. So in 1996 and 1998 and 2000, the elites were no less disconnected from the ordinary person they were today. They just were more successful.
So how deep a rut is the United States system of government in right now?
The system of government is in a deep rut, but the economy is in a deeper rut. What is going on here? And this should be very familiar to Canadians. Canadians spent half a decade in the 90s working out the consequences of over-indebtedness in the public sector. Americans are now working out the consequences of over-indebtedness in the private sector. The ratio of the debt of the household sector to national income hit a peak in 1929, collapsed obviously because of the Depression, and then people were very debt wary for a long time. But it began to accumulate in the 70s. This is mortgages plus credit cards plus auto loans, everything in the household sector. in 2000, in the middle 2000s, it catches up to the same level it was at, exactly the same as a share of national income as in 1929.
Now houses are underwater, and there you go.
So people are going to be discharging their debts, and it's going to take a long time. And after you get through with that miserable experience, one of the ways the United States has cushioned the shock of this private sector debt crisis is by increasing its public sector debt, and guess what has to happen then? That then, after the private sector debt, has to be worked out. So the United States is in for period of half a decade and maybe longer, very reminiscent of what Canada went through between about 1993 and 97, and it's just not going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be a bad time to be an incumbent.
But the conventional wisdom is never bet against America. Are you betting against America today?
No, I would never bet against America, but there was a rule we used to have at the Wall Street Journal when I was there. If you give a number, don't give a date. If you give a date, don't give a number. So I'm not, obviously the United States in 2025 will be a richer, stronger, more successful country than it is today. However, as between April and now, you know.
Who knows? Let's spend our remaining moments here talking about something that I know gets a lot of attention in the United States, but never really seems to take off. Did a little bit, I guess, under Ross Perot once upon a time, and that is a third force.
Yes.
You know, we have it in Canada. It's not only just Liberals and Conservatives. We've got these other parties. We're a two-party plus system. But in the United States, they don't really. Is there a viable third option out there today?
It's very hard to start a third party in the United States, partly because the Americans don't have national parties. They have federations of state parties. So what you're really doing is starting 50 parties if you want to launch a new party. And Ross Perot, with all his wealth, was not able to do that. And then there is a problem that the parties do too good a job of mapping the preferences of the most politically active part of the population. And this is the problem I have with my website. If you start with the assumption that 85% of the country is unrepresented, but 15% is too represented, and you say, well, I'm going to talk to the 85%, the problem is they're also the people who are least interested in politics. So there is a reason that the extremes drive both parties. And so, look, obviously I think this is worth doing. This is what I'm spending my life these days doing, and trying in the journalistic world to build a third force. But for a politician, it will be challenging. Now, that said, there are people who are interested. And I wonder, for example, if a David Petraeus looks at the American party system and says, I'm not a Democrat, I know that, I'm not a liberal, but I look at these Republicans and they look like maniacs. And people in the military all have universal health care, and it doesn't seem to detract too much from the effectiveness of the U.S. military. And we all, we insist on very high educational standards for everybody, and we think blacks can learn as much as whites. Why can't the society look like the military? That would be a natural way for somebody like him to think.
Have you talked to him about this?
Have I talked to him about this?
No.
Yeah. But he doesn't talk about this. But
well, he's said absolutely not, under no circumstances ever will I run for president. Sounded pretty Sherman-esque to me.
That's what they all say.
Until they change their mind.
Yes.
Well, let me throw a dream ticket at you, and you tell me if this is nuts.
Yeah.
Mike Bloomberg and Joe Scarborough.
Here's
Mayor of New York and the guy who used to be a congressman from Florida,
Yes.
now has got that morning TV show.
I don't know what Bloomberg is. I wonder whether Bloomberg is really thinking about it, because you have to. You have this problem. I saw this on the Giuliani campaign, that nobody who's been mayor of New York can ever really believe there's a better job than that, or a more important job than that. But Bloomberg has a potential to have a very big role here. Has an enormous fortune. He is aware of the dysfunction of the American political system. Will he actually go and do it? I think you need to find somebody who can connect with that middle part. And one of the issues, and I think this is one of the places where Bloomberg would have trouble, so one of the things that middle 85% feels very unrepresented on is the issue of immigration. Most Americans want a much more restrictive policy than there is now, and I think they're right to do so. It has an impact on the wage of the average person. It has a reinforcing impact on economic inequality, because immigration works by adding to the incomes, or the particular type of immigration the Americans have. Canada is different. Adds to the incomes of the people at the top and detracts from the incomes of the people at the bottom. Bloomberg is missing that sweet spot in American politics, which is inclusive, which is committed to equalizing the conditions of blacks and whites more than they are, but not adding to this problem.
He's got brains, he's got money, he's got experience, he's got good links to both the main political parties without being captives of either one, and Scarborough is a great mouthpiece.
You would have to find a way to connect to where the middle is. You can't construct the middle as you'd like it to be. And the unrepresented 85%, we think, what are the issues that where the country agrees and where the two parties are united against where the country is. Immigration is not the only one, but it is one. I think another issue where the two parties are united is the role of business in politics and having it really is true. People always say it's worse than it's ever been before, and you say, well, gee, that sounds like exaggeration, except it's always true. It always is worse than it is before, and it's going to be worse in the new Congress than it was before.
Yikes. David, it's always good of you to join us here at TVO. Thanks so much for visiting.
Thank you very much.